My name is Don Coyas. I am the president and founder at White Bison in Colorado Springs. When things are out of harmony, we ask the elders for a teaching that we can depend upon that will lead us to a healthy solution. This is that teaching. It's a teaching that tells us how to stop the transfer of intergenerational trauma from one generation to the next. A quick overview of the movement White Bison started in 1988, and then in the mid-90s the elders instructed us to build this hoop and to invite the elders from the four directions, red, yellow, black, and white. Then we took the hoop out by the white buffalo calf, and these four elders, they put in some gifts that they said that we would need for the healing to take place, that we were in a time of healing. One of the gifts was forgiving the unforgivable, one was unity, one was healing, and one was hope. Then, as we know, thanks to Dr. Duran and to Maria Braveheart, they started to relate to us some research on what happened at the boarding schools and how those things are connected to what our social issues are today. So during those times, started in 1879, the government built 500 schools to set up in the United States to assimilate our children into the dominant culture. But what happened over a period of time was our communities, they look more like this. What we now know is, due to the science world, etc., is that trauma is recorded in the DNA and transferred down from one generation to the next. And so we are carrying the hurts of those ancestors inside of us. Even though you didn't go to the boarding school, you still could have the results of the boarding school behavior. And so this intergenerational trauma, or historical trauma, is called both things. So we started to realize a big aha for us that's involved in the movement, that alcohol is not the problem, it's a symptom of something else. The suicide is connected to something else, and the meth and the violence and the heroin and the abuse is all connected to something else. And that something else for us as Native people is this intergenerational trauma. It's something very, very deep in our communities, and we're handing it on from one generation to the next. And so we didn't know this until maybe 7, 8, 9 years ago, thanks to the research of our own people that did the research. So we found out that we are handing this trauma events down from one generation to the next. But the other thing that we also found out is, in order to break this cycle, to stop the transfer, then what we realize is that we have the ability, this current generation, the men and the women, if we break the cycle within ourselves, we will stop the transfer of this intergenerational trauma down to our children. And this is how we break the cycle. So this is the teaching that we're talking about, is how do we stop this transfer. And so this is a teaching that they gave us. It has 4 directions: recognize, acknowledge, forgive, and change. What this means is that we need to recognize what intergenerational trauma is. So over this last number of years, in our talk among our communities and the educators and schools and videos, in fact, we have a video on YouTube that you can watch. It's called A Journey to Forgiveness, but it tells you a 1-hour documentary of the stories of what happened to the elders when they were in the boarding schools. So it's to recognize what this trauma is. It's important in our awareness to realize this is what the trauma is. It's about the sexual abuse, it's about the beatings, it's about the violence and other things that happened that we can trace it back, you see, to the boarding schools. The second thing is the acknowledgement. And so what this means is, in the cycle of healing, is that if it is acknowledged that what we recognize actually did happen, In other words, someone would say, this is what did happen. We did take the children. We did take the children away from the communities. There was sexual abuse. There were beatings that went on. We intended to take away your culture. You were punished if you spoke the language. There were beatings were taking place. And so when someone says this out loud, then it allows us to go on to the next direction. And the next direction is forgiveness. And there's 4 directions of forgiveness that the elders gave us. One is a basic forgiveness. This is like when I bump into somebody, I say, oh, I'm sorry, forgive me, in other words, for what you're saying. The second type of forgiveness is one called forgiving the unforgivable. This would be like domestic violence, sexual abuse, those types of things. And in a lot of cases, this forgiveness, we cannot do it ourselves without the Creator's help. That the Creator has to give us this power to forgive that type of hurt that we have encountered along the way. The third forgiveness that we have to do is this called forgiving ourselves. Sometimes just because we were stupid or we were drinking or we did something, and then it's very, very difficult to forgive self, but it needs to happen. And then the fourth type of forgiveness would be the type of forgiveness that you do to set the spirit of the other one free. This might be like a forgiveness for the United States government for what it did. And forgiveness doesn't mean that we forget. Forgiveness means that we let go. When we are carrying around the hurts and the resentments and those things inside of ourselves, then that's like giving our power away. So forgiving allows us to make this thing free. But most important, it's a forgiveness that stops the transfer from one generation, you see, to the next. And then we're allowed to change. Whether that change is coming back to the culture, whether it's whatever a person's goal is to teach the children, but to recognize there's a process that they gave us. Recognize, acknowledge, forgive, and change. When we go talk about the apology from the United States government, what we are after is this acknowledgement. This is what we want to have happen, is that someone, hopefully President Obama, out loud in public would say, this is what I want the whole world to know. These are the things that our government did that was devastating to the communities. It was like a cultural genocide. And so we have the choice of not passing this on from one generation to the next. We can be the generation that makes the change. Whatever generation it is that makes the change, that generation is going to have to go through some healing, through some tears, through some grief work. We need our ceremonies. We need our medicines in order for us to help we don't pass this on to our children. So I guess the question really is do we love our children enough that we will go through the healing the hurt so that they don't have to, so we're not passing. So we have many social issues in our communities. From mental health, with our children, we have child abuse, suicides, FAS, fetal alcohol syndrome, the violence, HIV, prescription drugs. But our culture and our medicine is powerful enough to overcome this. So we have the ability to go from this type of a community, and then we start to go into this kind of community where we start to see a return of the culture, of the sweats, of the spirituality, of the programs, of the family, the healing of families, the healing of children, our leadership, etc. So we have the ability to rebuild our communities that will look more like this, that we're the warriors that we once were, protecting our communities, raising our children with the teachings, with culture, with the spirituality. And so what we're asking is we need a part from the United States government, and that part would be to acknowledge, get this acknowledgement from them that these things that we've talked about, they did happen. So below is the petition we ask you to sign. This petition at this website takes only a minute. They just ask for your name, for your email address, then it will send you an email, and then you need to acknowledge the email that you got it, and that will help us get the signatures. So we ask you to please help us get this acknowledgement so that the healing can continue. That tells us how to stop the transfer of intergenerational trauma from one generation to the next. A quick overview of the movement started in White Bison started in 1988, and then in the mid-90s the elders instructed us to build this hoop and to invite the elders from the 4 directions. We asked the elders for a teaching that we can depend upon that will lead us to a healthy solution. This is that teaching. It's a teaching red, yellow, black, and white. Then we took the hoop up by the white buffalo calf, and these 4 elders, they put in some gifts that they said that we would need for the healing to take place. My name is Don Coyas. I am the president and founder at White Bison in Colorado Springs. When things are out of harmony